I was driving my wife to our son's wedding when my phone buzzed. A short message. No name. Pull over. Turn back now. Don't let her inject. Kelly turned to me. The medication pen was already in her hand. That familiar look of someone who survives by staying on time every single day. That was the first contradiction. The very thing keeping her alive could also close every door in front of her. I turned the wheel hard, right there among the pine trees outside Asheville. As the car swung around, I knew one thing for sure. Someone did not want my wife walking into that ceremony. Before I go on, if you're listening to this story, please subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Your presence helps family stories like this be told all the way through. And now, for you to understand why I turned the car around in the Asheville Pines that day, I need to go back to the moment right after that message arrived. I didn't say a word as I turned the car around. The narrow road through the Asheville Pines slid under the tires like a late warning. Kelly sat beside me, unusually quiet. She didn't ask why I swerved so suddenly. Maybe because she's learned my silences after nearly half a century together. Or maybe because her focus was on the medication pen in her hand, the thing that had been with her every day. On time, without fail. The phone signal weakened. The screen flickered. I glanced at the rearview mirror. No one behind us. The pine forest was thick, a light wind, the sharp smell of sap in the air. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Places that quiet usually hide something underneath. That message wasn't advice. It was an order. I recognized the tone even without sound. The language of people who once stood beside me in long nights when decisions had to be made before it was too late. I looked down at the phone on the console. An unknown number. No photo. Just a dozen words. Enough to make me change direction. Kelly took a slow breath. "I'm a little tired," she said softly. No panic. Just a familiar admission. I knew that sign. I knew her routine when something felt off. Her hand drifting to her pocket, her thumb resting on the button of the pen. A reflex trained over many years. I placed my hand on her wrist and stopped her. "Wait a moment," I said. "Just 2 words. No explanation, no argument." She looked at me, surprised. "It's time." I didn't deny it. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, where a sharp curve was opening up. In my mind, small details began lining up. The pine forest, the weak signal, the isolated estate, Jack's sudden intensity over the past few weeks, the constant check-in calls, the overly careful reminders about medication and timing. I'd seen that kind of concern before, at scenes where someone tried too hard to prove they were innocent. The car slowed. I pulled into a small turnout by an old ranger station. A weathered wooden sign, no one around. I shut off the engine. Silence rushed in. Thick, heavy. Kelly looked around then at me. "What's going on?" I opened the door and stepped out. Not to avoid her question, but to straighten my thoughts. I needed light. I needed air. I needed a few seconds to fit the scattered pieces into something clear. I got back in, took the medication pen from Kelly's hand. She let me, though she was clearly uneasy. I didn't remove the cap. I just turned the pen slightly under the dim light filtering through the trees. The liquid inside reflected differently. Not something most people would notice. But for me, small differences were always where the truth began to surface, Scott Kelly said, her voice lower now. "You're scaring me." I nodded. "I know. I placed the pen on the dashboard a little farther from her reach. But I need you to trust me, at least for a few minutes." She exhaled and leaned back. The exhaustion showed clearly on that familiar face. Part of me hated myself for bringing her this far into a place where every way out felt narrow. Another part of me stayed cold and clear. If something was wrong, the most dangerous moment was when everyone believed they were safe. The phone buzzed again. This time, a short voice message. I put it on speaker and lowered the volume. The man's voice was deep, urgent, direct. He didn't repeat the earlier warning. He said just one sentence, enough to close the last bit of doubt in my mind. I turned off the speaker. Kelly looked at me waiting. I didn't repeat his words. I only said what mattered. Someone interfered with the thing you trust the most. She stayed silent for a long time. The pine trees whispered outside as if listening. I looked at her, and for the first time on my son's wedding day, I didn't think about the ceremony. I didn't think about the guests. I thought only about how to get my wife out of here, safe, whole. I started the engine again. I didn't turn back the way we came. I didn't drive straight toward the estate. I chose the longer road, quieter, more isolated. In my mind, the decision was already made, clear like the cases I once closed in my life. If someone believed they could exploit a mother's trust and the habit that kept her alive, they chose the wrong family to test their luck. The detour led us to another abandoned ranger station. Smaller, hidden behind a line of fallen trees. I stopped there, not because the road ended, but because I needed time. Time to confirm what my professional instincts had been knocking on since the phone buzzed the first time. I opened the trunk and took out the old flashlight I still kept in the toolbox. Kelly stayed in the car, her hands resting on her lap. She didn't ask anything else. Her trust has always been something I'm grateful for, and something that weighs on me at the same time. I got back into the driver's seat and picked up the medication pen again. The flashlight beam passed over the cartridge. I tilted it, turned it slowly, held the light at a fixed angle. The liquid wasn't completely clear. There was a faint cloudiness, almost impossible to see unless you were really looking. Tiny air bubbles clung to the side of the tube. They didn't move the way I was used to. I didn't jump to conclusions. I never have. I set the pen down and took out my phone. I found the number of someone I used to work with, a forensic pharmacist, retired now, like me. The signal was weak. The call broke in and out. I kept my words short, avoided terms that could make the line go dead. He stayed silent for a few seconds on the other end. Then he asked me one question. "Are you sure that's what she normally uses?" I looked at Kelly. "No," I said. "I'm not sure." That was enough for him. He didn't explain at length. He just reminded me that small differences in a solution are sometimes not accidental, and that certain combinations can keep the human body from reacting the way it's supposed to. I thanked him and ended the call. When the screen went dark, the silence rushed back in, thicker than before. I leaned back and closed my eyes for a few breaths. Old images surfaced, out of order. Jack as a little boy, running around the backyard, clinging to my hand whenever thunder rolled. Jack in recent years, avoiding my eyes, that strained smile every time I asked about work. Then Zoe, appearing too fast, too polished, the way she organized Kelly's medication bag, the way she reminded her of injection times, her voice soft and sweet. Once I'd noticed a strange smell on her hands, faint, hard to name. When I mentioned it, Jack laughed it off, said I saw signs everywhere because of my old job. I let it go. That was my mistake. I opened the glove compartment. Inside, among random papers, was a thin, folded sheet, a copy of a document I didn't remember giving to anyone. The fold wasn't Kelly's. I picked it up. I didn't need to read it carefully. Seeing the top corner was enough. Some things, once you see them, you never return to being neutral again. Kelly shifted slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked. I turned to her and kept my voice steady. "I'm just fitting a few pieces together." I put the paper back and closed the compartment. "And I don't like the picture that's forming." She looked at the pen on the dashboard. "So, what should I do?" That question tightened my chest. I'd spent my life giving instructions to others, in situations where every option had a cost. But this was my wife, and what I needed most right now was to keep her safe without planting more fear. "You're not going to use that," I said. "At least not until we're out of this forest." I handed her a small piece of candy I always carried. Not to explain anything, just to replace a habit with another action. Something simple, something familiar. She nodded and did as I asked. That quiet cooperation only strengthened my resolve. I started the car. This time I didn't drive fast. I kept a steady pace as if nothing were wrong. I needed a clear head. I needed time. I needed to think about the next step. Not just avoiding danger, but exposing it. The phone buzzed again. Not an unknown number. "Jack." I let it ring until it stopped. Then a text came through. "Dad, where are you? Is Mom okay?" I stared at the words for a long time. Concern. Packaged neatly. Perfectly timed. I didn't reply. In my mind, a plan began to form. Quiet. Unhurried. I would return to the estate. But not the way they expected. I would go alone. I would bring the thing they believed was the key. Not to use it, but to place it under the strongest light possible. The car left the detour and merged back toward the road leading to the estate, far enough away that I could stop at any moment. I looked at Kelly. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe," I said. Then I'm coming back. She took my hand. No pleading, no resistance. Just a gentle squeeze, a reminder that we'd walked through darker turns than this before. I nodded. The decision was made. As the pine canopy thinned and the road opened ahead, I knew I was stepping into the hardest part. Not because of fear, but because the truth, once placed in the right position, closes doors that never open again. And this time, it was the door between me and the son I once trusted completely. I took Kelly off the road and into a small roadside motel, far enough from the estate for the phone signal to stabilize again. Nothing fancy, not crowded. I chose a ground floor room, the window facing an empty parking lot. When she sat down on the edge of the bed, I finally allowed my breathing to slow. I placed the medication pen into the mini-safe and locked it, not because I was afraid someone would steal it, but because I needed it in the right place, a place I controlled. "Are you really going back?" Kelly asked. Her voice was calm, but her eyes gave away the worry. "I am," I said, "but not to attend the party." I paused. "I need you here, safe." She nodded. No more questions. I left her the motel's phone number and asked the front desk to call me if anything felt off. Before I walked out, I stopped at the door and looked at the woman who had walked beside me for an entire lifetime. In that moment, every last doubt inside me shut itself down. What needed to be done was clear. On the drive back, I stayed in the right lane. Steady speed. I needed a clear head to rebuild the picture in order. Zoe had once been a nurse. She understood the routines of people with chronic illness. Fatigue, sweating, confusion, signs that are easy to misread. She also understood crowds, sunlight, music, emotion, how all of it could make people forget to double-check what seemed obvious. A plan that didn't require speed, only patience. I remembered the messages before the wedding. "Mom, remember to inject on time. It'll be sunny, don't forget your medication. I'll prepare the medicine bag so it's easier." That attentiveness now looked like a schedule already set. Standing in the sun long enough to drain the body, dancing to raise the heart rate, speaking in front of a crowd to push emotions higher. Each piece made sense on its own. Together, they formed a one-way path. I arrived at the estate after the ceremony had begun. Cars filled the lot. Lights and music spilled all the way to the gate. I didn't rush out of the car. I sat and watched. Servers moved in rhythm. Drink trays appeared at just the right moments. I checked my watch. Time, the thing they believed was on their side, was moving according to mine. I slipped the medication pen into my inner jacket pocket. Easy to reach, hard to see. Not to use it, just to ask the right question in the right place. I walked into the hall like an ordinary father. No hurry, no tension. I smiled at familiar faces, nodded politely. I didn't look for Jack. I looked for Zoe. She stood near the drink station, light-colored dress, carefully done makeup. When she saw me alone, her eyes flickered. Just once. "Where's Mom?" she asked, concerned enough for others to hear. "Kelly's fine," I said. "She needs some rest." I paused as if remembering something. "Could you help me get some water?" Zoe smiled and reached for a tray. Her hand trembled, just slightly. I'd seen that kind of tremor before, not from vague fear, but from recognizing a variable that wasn't in the plan. I took out the medication pen and rested it openly in my palm. No hiding. "I brought this," I said evenly. "Just in case." I looked straight at her. "You know these things better than I do." For a brief moment, Zoe's smile stiffened. Then she recovered and nodded. "Yes, just leave it there." I leaned aside as if avoiding a guest passing by. A small slip. Just enough for the needle tip to brush her sleeve. Nothing happened. But her reaction did. She jumped back and dropped the tray. Glass hit the floor. Heads turned. Zoe went pale. Her breathing quickened. Someone who truly understands what's inside a needle doesn't react that way to a light touch. The music faltered. Eyes gathered. I bent down to pick up the tray, my voice calm. "Sorry, I'm clumsy." I straightened and looked around. "While we're here, I have a recording I need to play. It concerns my family." I turned on the speaker. "Not music," another man's voice. Flat, without emotion. The words didn't mention anything forbidden. Just deadlines. Debt. A condition repeated more than once. I didn't look at Jack while the voice played. I watched the crowd. People who were beginning to realize they were standing inside an uncomfortable truth. Jack stood up suddenly, his face drained of color. Zoe stepped back again, bumping into a table. I turned off the speaker. The silence afterward was so heavy you could hear breathing. There are plans, I said slowly, that disguise themselves as concern. And there are habits that get exploited because people believe they are always safe. I didn't accuse. I simply laid the pieces on the table. The police arrived not long after. I didn't call them here. I'd done that earlier from the parking lot. All I needed was time for things to reveal themselves. Jack was detained. Zoe stood still, staring at nothing. When I stepped outside, the air was cool. I took a deep breath. Every door that needed closing had closed. I didn't look back. There was only one thing left in my mind. To return to where Kelly was waiting and take us out of this forest. Not to run, but to begin a new, quiet. One where no one could ever use trust, like a schedule again. I didn't leave the grounds right away. I stood in the corridor outside the hall, where the wind carried the smell of damp grass and the hurried whispers behind doors that had just closed. The lights inside were still bright, but the air had changed. The silence was no longer empty. It had weight, pressure, forcing everyone to face what had just been exposed. An officer approached and gave a brief nod. I returned it. No words were needed. Everything had already moved into its track, just waiting for the right moment to turn. I checked my watch. Time moves more slowly when you stop chasing it. I went back into the hall, not to speak, but to observe. Jack sat in the front row, hands on his thighs, eyes fixed on the floor. Zoe stood beside him, back straight, shoulders rigid, the posture of someone trying to stay upright in a room that had suddenly tilted. I didn't look at them as a father, or as someone wounded. I looked the way I had many times before, to see who was losing control and what they were clinging to keep from falling apart. The officiant hesitated, then quietly set the microphone down. No one objected. Some guests stood and stepped back. Some looked at me. Others avoided my eyes. I understood. When an inconvenient truth appears in the middle of a celebration, the natural instinct is to find an exit. Zoe took one step toward me, then stopped. "You misunderstood," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. No long defense. Just a single sentence, as if speaking softly enough might let it drift away. I didn't answer right away. I touched the pen in my jacket pocket. Didn't take it out. Just felt it there. If it were a misunderstanding, I said slowly, that reaction wouldn't have happened. I didn't need to say which reaction. She knew. I saw it in the way her eyes froze for a split second. A medical staff member from the event approached, asking if anyone needed assistance. I shook my head. "Not here," I said. "Not now." I didn't want any rushed action to dilute the core of what mattered. This needed to be seen exactly as it was. No exaggeration. No cover. Jack looked up. "Dad," he said. His voice was rough. Just one word. I stepped closer, keeping enough distance so it didn't turn into a confrontation. "You chose your path," I said, "and you pulled your mother into that schedule." I paused. "That's enough." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The words he meant to say had nowhere to stand. I watched the collapse happen in layers. First confidence, then hope, then the stories people tell themselves to cope. I didn't interrupt. I had learned long ago that silence used at the right moment carries more weight than any speech. The police returned and gave a brief update. I listened, signed what needed signing. No handcuffs in front of the crowd, no noise, no spectacle. Everything moved cleanly, like a door closing with the correct key. A few people exhaled, not out of relief, but because familiar order was slowly returning. When Jack was asked to leave, he turned back and looked at me. That look was no longer the boy who once held my hand during thunder. It was the look of someone realizing there are choices that cannot be taken back. I held his gaze for one breath, then nodded. No forgiveness, no condemnation, just an ending. Zoe stayed a moment longer, as if waiting for a miracle that never came. Finally, she left, her steps so light they barely touched the floor. When the doors closed behind them, the space seemed to loosen. The music didn't start again. No one suggested continuing. The ceremony had completed its hardest part in a way no one had expected. I walked out to the parking lot. The sky had darkened. The air was cooler. I opened the car door, sat behind the wheel, and rested my hands there. For a very brief moment, I allowed myself to think of Kelly. Safe, light from the motel room spilling through the window. A quiet I had promised to keep intact. My phone buzzed. A message from the front desk. She's fine. Still resting. I let my shoulders drop. Some messages are short, yet strong enough to hold up an entire day. I started the engine. The road out of the estate curved through the pine forest. Darker now, but clear. No sense of being surrounded. No questions hanging in the air. Behind me were doors that had closed. Between me and a son. Between a family and things that could never return. Ahead was a different choice. To protect what remained, with clarity, without regret. As I merged onto the main road, I didn't speed up. I kept the headlights wide, just enough. I thought about habits. Things that seem harmless. And how easily they can be exploited when people forget to ask questions. Tonight, the questions had been asked. In the right place. At the right time. And that was the only reason I could drive on in silence, knowing I had done what needed to be done. No more, no less. I reached the motel when the parking lot was already quiet. A warm yellow light spilled from the ground floor window. A familiar sign that Kelly was still awake. I knocked softly twice. She opened the door right away, as if she had been standing just behind it. When she saw me, she didn't ask anything. She simply stepped back to let me in, then closed the door gently like closing a long day. I told her what needed to be told. No more, no less. I didn't describe the hall. I didn't mention the looks or the whispers. I only said that everything had been placed in the light and that we didn't have to return there again. Kelly listened, both hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. When I finished, she nodded. "That's enough," she said. "You did the right thing." We left Asheville the next morning. No goodbyes to the pine forest. No looking back. I checked out early, loaded the bags into the car, and placed a medication pen, a new one carefully checked, into Kelly's bag. She smiled. That familiar gesture had returned. On the road, I rolled the window down and let the wind in. The air felt lighter. The road no longer forced us to choose in a hurry. The news came later in the calm language of paperwork and scheduled meetings. I didn't attend anything beyond what was necessary. I signed when asked. I answered when questioned. I didn't tell the story to anyone else. Some things, once finished, should be left alone. We chose the Florida Keys for the sea. Kelly liked hearing the waves against the balcony each morning. I liked the straight roads, the open view, and a pace that didn't rush. We rented a small place. Enough sun, enough wind. In the mornings I made coffee. Kelly checked the time as she always did. Calm, precise. Habits returned to their proper place. No one using them, no one interfering. Some evenings, when the sun sank very slowly, Kelly asked if I felt sad. I thought for a moment, then answered honestly. "Yes," I said, "but sadness isn't regret. I was sad because a door had closed between me and the son who once meant everything to me. But I didn't regret protecting what remained. Sadness is a feeling. Regret is a choice. I didn't choose the second. From time to time, I received messages that were never sent. Words typed, then erased. I set the phone down. Not out of anger, but out of boundaries. Some boundaries don't need to be high. They just need to be clear. And clear is enough. One afternoon, Kelly stood on the wooden pier, watching fish move through the clear water. She took my hand. "Do you think all this happened to remind us of something?" she asked. I followed her gaze. "To remind us that trust is precious," I said. "And what's precious has to be protected." We slowed our lives down. I fixed an old clock, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Kelly planted a few small pots on the balcony. Each week we walked along the shoreline and counted the boats passing by. The days moved evenly. No drama needed. That was a good thing. One evening, when the wind was still, I sat down and wrote a few lines, not to preserve the story, but to close it within myself. I wrote about small details, the reflection of a flashlight, music stopping mid-note, the silence that followed. I wrote to remember that clarity is quiet, and fairness doesn't need display. Kelly placed her hand on my shoulder. "Are you done?" she asked. I closed the notebook. "I am," I said, and I knew it was true. When night fell and the waves moved steadily, I thought about the bond between parents and children. It isn't unbreakable. It's something held together by the right choices every single day. Someone chose wrong. I chose differently. That choice brought us here, a place with no schemes hidden beneath concern, only quiet mornings and peaceful evenings. If there is one thing I want to keep after all this, it is this peace. Not as a reward, but as the natural result of placing boundaries where they belong. Blood gives us connection. Character is what we choose to keep. And when every door that needs closing has closed, good things still find room to enter. Quietly, steadily, like the sea outside our door. If you've stayed with me to the end, you may understand this. Not every family story ends with laughter, but it can end with peace. Blood gives us a bond. Character decides how we hold it. Sometimes love isn't looking away. It's knowing when to stop to protect what is still right. If this story made you reflect, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so others can listen and ask their own questions. Your support helps these quiet, necessary stories continue to be told. Thank you for listening.